I'm going to hand over to Katie Wignall now, and Rosanna. Rosanna is from the East End Women's Museum. This is an East End Women's Museum event tonight, a virtual tour of Canning Town. And Katie Wignall, award-winning blogger and Blue Badge guide. And you may have seen her on TV just recently. When was it, Katie?
It was on Tuesday on ITV News London.
Fantastic. So all excited to have Katie here tonight. Rosanna, did you want to say a word first before we kick off?
Yes, welcome from the East End Women's Museum. Jan said everything I wanted to say anyway. We're absolutely delighted to have you here, whether you're new to Newham and Canning Town or whether you're born and bred. We welcome you all. So yes, handing over to Katie. There's going to be time for questions and comments. As Jan said, just pop them in the chat box. And welcome everyone. We're delighted to have you. Over to Katie.
Thank you, Rosanna and Jan. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thank you for everyone putting where they're tuning in from in the chat box. It's really interesting to see. And I know we probably have lots of people local to Canning Town as well, or in Newham, which is the area that we're exploring today. So as was said, sorry about that. As was mentioned, the theme of the Newham Heritage Month is shops and docks and workers. And we're certainly going to see some of that today, but really our overriding theme is the wonderful women of Newham, and in particular Canning Town. So I'm just going to start by sharing my screen with you. And then we will go. If you've joined me for a virtual tour before, it tends to last around about an hour. We're going to have a pause just in the middle of the presentation, and then that will be a chance to ask questions. If you have any while we go through, please do pop them in the chat box, and I know that Jan and Rosanna will be able to keep an eye on them as we go through as well. And also, because I know this is all about local history, so really it would be so nice if people who have memories, who know these streets, if they chip in as well and share their memories of places that we're going to. So I'd love to see them as we're going along. So for our tour today, this is the rough route. We're going to start at the bottom of the screen here by Canning Town Station. And we're not travelling a huge amount of distance. We're just wiggling our way up towards a nice green space of Hermit Road Recreation Park to end up at the top of the map here now. So the area of Canning Town is in the East End of London. So if we zoom out a little bit, here we have a much earlier map from 1746, and you can see that this area, which is just called Plaistow on the map here, this is a John Rock map from 1746. You can see the little red dot by the loop of the Bow Creek. That is Canning Town Station, the rough area of it. So really into the 1770s, 1700s, all of this area that we know today as Canning Town was these marshland, not a lot going on. And it was only in the early 1800s when an iron bridge is built over Bow Creek that you start this expanse of building. And then in comes railway lines, and then in comes industry. And so actually in quite a short period in the 1800s, you get a huge amount of building, and that's really reflected in the next slide here. This is a map from around the 1870s. You can see the building here of Victoria Docks. Victoria Docks were built around the 1850s, and these were absolutely key to the industry of the area, providing a lot of jobs, drawing people over to this part of town. And then you can see the kind of ensuing building work again. So This, I really like this image from 1856. So this would have been just after the Victoria Docks were built. And, you know, you could see the Bow Creek on the left-hand side still looking rather kind of rural. Almost you could be kidded into believing it was sort of idyllic rural in this area. But unfortunately, as of 1844, it was outside the kind of official London Building Act, something that was called the Metropolitan Building Acts. And this was a chance to regulate trade around London as a whole, and anything outside of it was a kind of free-for-all. And this meant that huge industries could be built that were quite polluting, that were quite smelly, outside of central London to protect the noses of kind of the West End. And these were built in this area, and it did mean that unfortunately a lot of shoddy and poorer housing was being built in the area as well. So if we skip forward to 1900, you can see just how much this area has changed. Above the Victoria Docks, you've got a huge amount of streets being laid out, of houses, and there's quite a strong quote from Charles Dickens that we'll come to later about this area, which he refers to as Hallsville. And he talks about it as this kind of on the border, this other town. And it definitely has this character of being the other side of Bow Creek, you know, a kind of other London. So I just think it's important to get a bit of that context, because it really does shape the lives of the people that we're going to be talking about today, largely women who have lived in the area. And we're focusing today on these women's stories, and largely really working class women. A lot of them that we're going to talk about today were also part of the suffragette movement, the political movement for getting the votes for women. But perhaps you might have recognised some of these names, but some of them I hope are new to you as well. Of course, there's a real mixture of the things, the resources that were available, and so often the words and the pictures and the places that working class women were living in just don't survive today. We don't have the historic resources. So I'm so sorry that I can't show you pictures of everyone that we're talking about today. Unfortunately, that's just how history works sometimes, but we will have lots of pictures going through. So we're skipping forward right now to the 1940s. This is an aerial view, and you can see huge amounts of development underway. We still have that loop of the Bow Creek, the thinner river above the loop of the Great River Thames, and the red dot again is Canning Town. So that's where we're going to start our tour today, outside Canning Town Station. And it is an area which perhaps if you grew up in Canning Town, you might return and just feel it looks totally different. After the London 2012 Olympics in 2012, there was a huge amount of development, perhaps not catering wholly to all of the local residents, but a lot of movement in the Canning Town area and the borough of Newham, which was one of the host boroughs. And so there's been a huge push for development in recent years. And you can certainly see this outside Canning Town Station. So you wouldn't guess that this is a place to sort of start a tour and maybe go on the lookout for history. But as you pan down, so often in London, it's the street names that give us these little clues about events and people in the area. And this one here is for Minnie Bulldog. And Minnie Bulldog was a suffragette. So she was a local East End girl. She was born in Bromley by Bow in 1864. And here is an image of her here. So looking very, very much the kind of middle class Victorian woman. And we have another image of here, which is circled. She's standing next to Christabel Pankhurst, one of the daughter of Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the Women's Social Political Union, and really the figurehead of the women's suffrage movement. And Minnie Bulldog, she was working class. She worked in a spotted labour factory, and she was a socialist as well. She joined the Independent Labour Party, so she was fully committed not only to get the vote for women, but also to improve conditions of the working classes in the East End as well. So she joined the Women's Social Political Union, and she was one of the leading figures within the party there as well. And I love this story of gradually the WSPU were becoming more militant, becoming more bold with the kind of attention-grabbing stunts that they were doing. And Minnie Bulldog, she dressed up as a maid and accompanied some other suffragettes to the Royal Albert Hall, where there were elections and pre-election meetings of the Liberal Party. And Minnie Bulldog snuck her way in, sat in a box in the Royal Albert Hall, and then unfurled a banner over the edge that read "Votes for Women," and started shouting and attracted attention in the crowd. I think she was then probably swiftly thrown out of the auditorium, but those were the kind of stunts and the daring escapades that were going on at the time. Minnie actually lived in Canning Down a bit later in her life, so we'll show you that later. Unfortunately, though, she did suffer with her health later in life. In around 1911, she had to have surgery, and I thought it was worth mentioning because actually the woman who performed the surgery was this lady here, Louisa Aldrich Blake, who was the first woman to qualify as a surgeon in England, and she performed the surgery on Minnie. Now, after 1911, because of her ill health, and some say as well she was very shocked and not very happy with the WSPU because of the way that they had got even more militant, she decided to kind of withdraw from the party, and she retired outside of London. But she lived until she was 90 years old, which is pretty good going, I think. So she did see the Votes for Women come in. So from Minnie Bulldog, we're following the little purple line along here and going to the next stop along. And as you can see, we're still surrounded by very much by new build flats and retail space right by Canning Town Station. But yet again, a street name saves us. We can see Sylvia Pankhurst. And Sylvia is probably the kind of more famous of the women that we're going to talk about today. Here is here's an image of her. And Sylvia was born in Manchester, again, sister to Christabel, daughter to Emmeline Pankhurst. And Sylvia moved to London in 1888. Now, if you've studied kind of London's history, the year 1888 sticks out for all the wrong reasons. It's famous for the Whitechapel murders by this never discovered murderer known as Jack the Ripper. And Sylvia talked about later in life how affected she was by these murders and seeing the brutality in which women had been treated. And she slightly differs from the rest of the Pankhurst family, and these undertones kind of boil up and come to a head later in about 1914, when actually she leaves the WSPU, the organisation, and she sets up the East London Suffragettes, the ELS. And this is a really key turning point, especially for the other people that we're talking about during the tour today, because Sylvia was like Minnie and like many other of the women that we're going to talk about today, so passionate that it wasn't just about the votes for women, but it was about improving everybody's lives. Remember, at this point, some men didn't have the vote as well. And so she really she thought, you know, what's the point of having a vote if you can't put food on the table, or you can't clothe yourself? So it really was a holistic approach to bettering life within the Canning Town and Newham area. Sylvia herself, though, rather incongruously, was a writer and an artist. She got a scholarship at the Royal College of Art. And so she's the person that we have to thank for a lot of the visual imagery, the badges, the flags, the colours of the Women's Social Political Union. She designed the hunger strike badges of honour that were given to women who had served prison sentences. But as I mentioned, she did split with the WSPU and founded the East London Suffragettes. And for a while they were based in Bow, a bit further west than Canning Town. But there very much was a hub of key WSPU women based around Canning Town. And we're going to see this a little bit later on. But I thought it was worth mentioning from Sylvia Pankhurst Street that you can see just below the words Canning Town. If you were to walk, and feeling very keen, back towards sort of Bow, where the East London Federation of Suffragettes was first based, there's a wonderful bit of street art there at the moment, which really celebrates Sylvia in the centre here, as well as the work of the East London Federation of Suffragettes. So from Sylvia, we're moving into Rathbone Street. And again, this is, if you know the Canning Town area, somewhere that has changed very drastically in the last couple of decades. So you can see all the development ahead of you there. And ahead of us now is this new planned out, yet more building is going up, and this is the Hallsville Quarter. And I thought, as we make our way down Rathbone, I'd just read to you what Charles Dickens had to say about this area of London. So this was written in 1857. So shortly after it was sanctioned for all of this industrial building to go on this side of town. And he says, by the law, there is one suburb on the border of the Essex marshes, which is quite cut off from the comforts of the Metropolitan Building Acts. In fact, it lies just without its boundaries, and therefore is chosen as a place of refuge for offensive trade establishments turned out of the town, those of oil boilers, gut spinners, varnish makers, print ink makers, and the like. So he's really talking about it, as I said kind of earlier. It is this other part of town, a real separate side of London where these trades are being are taking place, and this does affect the whole area that we'll see a bit later on. So along Rathbone Street, and unfortunately we can't see any evidence of it today, but there once was a pill making shop owned by a woman called Sarah Harriet Bishop, and she was listed as the proprietor in around 1911. She actually then died in 1912. But seeing as the theme of Newham Heritage Month, these shops are part of it, these women who were running their own businesses in a pretty tough area of London just deserve a mention. Unfortunately, as I explained at the beginning, we don't have a picture of Sarah Harriet Bishop, so we'll just have to use our imaginations. But her shop was based along Rathbone Street here. And another woman, again along Rathbone Street, a woman called Jane Sharman ran. She ran a pie and mash shop selling as you might guess, pie, mash and liquor, that great staple filling food for people going off to work in factories in the East End or around the docks area. And later this was handed over to another woman known as Mrs. Ollie's. And there is a picture along Rathbone Street Market, which perhaps some people who are tuning in today might actually remember this shop, Mrs. Ollie. So here is a picture I've just managed to find on Pinterest here being shared. This is around about the 1960s, but it gives you an idea. It's almost quite sad really to see the change from Rathbone Street as a bustling street market and to being basically quite quiet in comparison today. However, the market itself has moved on to a different location, not quite looking the same today, but that's where we're going to head to now. So as we pan around on Rathbone Street, we're going to head up towards the Barking Road, this huge thoroughfare out further east of London. And if you were walking here today, you have to go sort of under an underpass, but the power of the virtual tour means we can sort of leap across. So just panning around, you can see the kind of Rathbone Street area today. We're going to hop over the bypass and go to look at an aerial view. The red dot is just where we've been. And this area that I'm just about to circle now is captured really nicely in the 1960s, I believe, an aerial shot you can see over the side here, yeah, 1968. So this was Rathbone Street Market, the pictures that I showed you before. And what's interesting is that although this scene has very much changed today, you can spot the same icons along the Barking Road here. So where I've just circled is a church, and we're going to now zoom in to modern day to see it ahead of us here. So this is St Margaret's Church, but actually our focus is just next door, this blue anchor of Anchor House and a charity called Caritas. And today this is a charity focusing on tackling homelessness in London, and it caters for the local community. It was founded in the 1960s. The Anchor connection was because originally it was centred around the docks, about seamen that were coming and going within the local area. But of course, as the docks closed a bit later on, it's kind of pivoted in its aims. But I mention it because it was on the site of a much earlier building that became known as the Canning Town Women's Settlement. And the women's settlement and the whole settlement movement in itself really came about because of the stark contrasts between different areas of London. So if we think about that quote from Charles Dickens, if we think about the physical separation by law of an area that could have quite horrible industries being based there. A lot of people saw the poverty of the East End of London and were really shocked that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people were living like this. And the settlement movement was predominantly middle, upper class people who were driven to go and help in the East End. Today, you know, we might view this as a little bit patronising, but it was incredibly well-meaning at the time. Now, you can see I've just labelled the Caritas charity on the right-hand side under where it says Canning Town. And I just want to mention another building, part of this settlement movement that you can still see today, because unfortunately we don't have the surviving Canning Town Women's Settlement. So if you would go to Spitalfields today, you would see Toynbee Hall. And Toynbee Hall was the world's first university settlement. They were partnered with, I can't remember which university now. I don't think it was Oxford, because you had Oxford House, perhaps a different college in Oxford. But you can see the building has been completely refurbished today. And this was essentially a place where students from university could come and live cheek by jowl in the East End to get a better understanding of the conditions here and then help the local poor in the area. And it was set up by Samuel and Henrietta Barnett, who you see here. But zooming back to Caritas Anchor House, we're going to just do a short walk because, as I mentioned, we've got the home here on Oak Crescent. This was actually lived in by the Bulldogs, Minnie and Henry Bulldog, who I mentioned earlier. And they, as you can see, sadly, there's nothing left of the house on this site, but they lived in this area of Canning Town before later moving on. So they are again listed in 1891 on the census that you can see here. So we're just going to have a quick pause. I can see lots of kind of messages popping up in the chat. So I'll try my best to answer any questions, or if there's any comments as well, that would be great. So I'm just going to stop sharing now. It might just be people saying they're tuning in from. I don't know if you've seen any questions, Jan, that you wanted to raise.
I'm just having...
Rosie said there's an amazing book out of print called Dear Girl, The Diaries and Letters of Two Working Women, 1897 to 1917. And it reminds me a lot of the women that you describe here. That's a really good point, Rosie, and I think that what we lack in conventional history, let's say, of, you know, official records, photographs, and the likes for perhaps middle and upper class women, we get in really rich memoirs and stories. And thankfully, in the rising interest of people tracing their family history, there's been some fantastic recent publications. It's more towards the Silvertown area that we're going to talk about on Sunday. But for instance, the Sugar Girls, which is all about the lives of Tate and Lyle workers, you know, much more recent history, but these are such important stories. I recently read the memoir called Silvertown, which again is from a woman born at the turn of the 1900s, living through the 1900s in this area. And it's so often a history that doesn't really get told in the mainstream, and part of the fantastic work of the East End Women's Museum, which will be opening soon. Thank you, Rosie. St John's College, Oxford, was the supporters of Toynbee Hall. I thought it was Oxford. There you go, different college.
Katie, could I ask a question?
Aldo just asked if there was ever a list of register of some types of suffragettes in the area. I don't know where would be the best source for that. There's a fantastic book, which I'll mention a bit later, actually. It might be reversed on screen, but there's the East London Suffragettes, which gives a really good overview of the area. Cool. I'm conscious that I'm going too far. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. So let's crack on, and then we can return. Awesome. So we've just made it up to here along the kind of Barking Road area. And as I mentioned, we were outside the former site of the Canning Town women's settlement that opened around the 1890s. So just to show you an image here, unfortunately, I don't have images of the building itself, but really the important person in this story is one of the early wardens of the women's settlement, Rebecca Cheetham, and she was the warden from the 1890s until 1922. And here she is. I rather like this image of her sort of, I don't know if she's having a bit of cake or something. She looks like she's having a moment of peace, but she really was a tireless worker for the local community here. we're talking kind of really community grassroots outreach work that Rebecca was involved in, a staunch supporter of women's education, and really working tirelessly in the area. Here's another lovely image of her as well. And what's nice about this is there's actually a primary school that is named after Rebecca in the area. So it's a little bit of a walk from where the settlement was, but from the charity that we were standing outside, if you walked about half an hour, you can find the Nursery School, which is still going strong today. And that opened in 1930. So it was while Rebecca was alive, and she was apparently very moved by the fact that they chose to name it after her. And 1930 was quite early, really, for this very early years education and a place where children could go and start their education journey. And Rebecca said that it really warmed her heart to think about these children getting the best start in life. So from the site of the Canning Town Women's Settlement, we're just going a little bit further along the Barking Road to get to the former town hall. And this still looks, this thankfully is a building that does still stand today. So we can admire the red brick building from the outside. Again, these kind of buildings that you see in London, these municipal buildings, were built around the turn of the century. I think this is around about the 1890s as well. And I mention here the Canning Town Public Hall because this was the base for the Women's Social Political Union branch, the Canning Town branch. And this was set up by one of the founders of the Canning Town branch was a woman called Annie Kenny. And she was born in Oldham in Manchester, so the same area actually that the Pankhursts came from. And I just think I don't know, this image of her really kind of so direct, and you really get a sense of who she is as a person. I mean, from this image, it looks like kind of butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, but she was absolutely fierce in terms of a campaigner and a militant campaigner for the Women's Social Political Union. So along with Sylvia Pankhurst, she was based and set up the Canning Town branch, and she describes rather wonderfully actually getting involved in the suffragette movement earlier when she meets Emmeline Pankhurst up in Manchester after attending a speech, and she just talks about sort of not knowing what to say. It was like meeting a celebrity, and you know, she immediately then joined the WSPU. So Annie Kenny she founded this branch, and she worked closely with a lot of other suffragettes that were based in this area. And I wanted to, here's an earlier image of the town hall. And one of the suffragettes she worked with really closely was a woman called Adelaide Knights. And Adelaide Knight, as you can see here, she unfortunately, she suffered a lot with her health. She was born with abnormal thumbs, and she suffered throughout her life, had to use crutches for most of her adult life. But she did marry, seemingly happy marriage here, with Donald Adolphus Brown, who again is pictured here. There's another image of the WSPU, some of the founders here. You can actually, Annie Kenny is just circled with the red ring here. You can see the woman who's leaning over, unfortunately is unnamed, but Emmeline Pankhurst, looking rather kind of superior, is just on the right-hand side. And another woman on the far left-hand side is a woman called Flora Drummond. And Flora sounds like quite the character as well. She had a nickname called the General because she used to attend marches for the WSPU in this military-style uniform. And she was a fantastic public speaker. You can see her here with her whip. I think she must have been quite the sight to behold. So she was a fantastic speaker and could deal with hecklers in a rather fantastic put down manner, basically. So from the Canning Town Hall, we're going to continue along the Barking Road. Just to mention that it was at this town hall that not only did they have meetings for the Canning Town branch of the WSPU, but it was also a place where they would hear speeches from various other people who were trying to gather public support as well. So it wasn't just always about the votes for women, it was also about campaigning for higher wages, for better working conditions, part of the trade union movement as well. So like I mentioned before with Sylvia Pankhurst, the East London Federation of Suffragettes were really concerned, and the Canning Town branch of the WSPU, really concerned with this holistic approach that actually all areas of people living in Canning Town in the East End needed, all areas of their life needed a bit of improvement. It wasn't going to change from just gaining the vote. And this is really where Sylvia and her mother, Emmeline, fell out, because in a, sorry to say it, but quite a snooty way, Emmeline Pankhurst really did believe that, you know, by having lots of working class women, that they might confuse the cause of the getting the vote for women. She didn't think that perhaps they would be as convincing if they had lots of voices, and Sylvia totally disagreed, and this is why they kind of separated later in life. And I think it is true that this opinion is changing now. Now we know a lot more about the working class East London suffragettes that contributed just as much as the middle class suffragettes in Westminster. So we're continuing along the Barking Road now, and we're going to turn off in search of some of the lesser known women that ran shops in this area. So we're turning left onto Hermit Road, and this is a street we're going to return to just towards the end of the tour. And you can see that really this area is typified with a lot of rebuilding after the Second World War. The area, because it was so industrial, because it was so close to the docks and the hub of the money coming in from the empire, it was outstandingly bombed. Horrific bomb damage in this street, in the area, and you can see the evidence around you today. So we're just now at Clifford Road, and at 30 Clifford Road there was the site of a laundry which was run by a Mrs. Mary Ball. And again, we have no image of the shop, we have no image of Mary herself, but this is a woman who was working here, back-breaking work, washing everything by hand, a hugely demanding job, because it was people were working in dirty factories, getting their clothes really dirty and having to come to the laundrette in order to get anything close to clean clothes and linen and anything around the house. So this was a key job for local communities that wouldn't be able to have their own washing machine, or sometimes even access to lots of running water in the home itself as well. So it was a key need. As you can see, unfortunately, the house has been completely obliterated today. But we're going to continue along Clifford Road, because as we continue, there's rather nice burst of colour that we get to just towards Exning Road. So we turned right onto Exning Road, and we're getting to another stop, which I'll come back to at number 47, which is on this side of the street. But first I want to show you this mural, which rather brightens up the housing along this street. And it's a celebration of kind of plaster and the marshes that were here before. So we've got the construction of the Eastern Counties Railway. As I mentioned, really the railway started, and the Victoria Docks kick-started all of the industry coming into the Canning Town area. And you've got this rather idealised image of the kind of beauty countryside images of the plaster marshes with the chugging along railway in the background. If you're walking along this street, it is worth as well having a closer look, because on the other side of the pillar, you've got a celebration really of all these different businesses around the Newham and slightly further afield West Ham area. And one that I wanted to pick out was this, the Spotted Dog, which is a little bit off our patch today of Canning Town, is more towards Upton. So you can still find this pub today. I'll just go back because it tells you have good accommodation for cricket and other sport. And just at the bottom there, you can see William Vars was the proprietor of this pub. Now, amazingly, this pub does still stand today, and it's something of a rare gem in London. I mean, to walk past it, you might not guess, but actually the timbers of this and the interior fabric date from the 16th, possibly 15th century in on the site here at, I think it's 212 Upton Lane. And going through the records of people that have owned this pub, the Vars family that were mentioned, William Vars, owned the pub for about 150 years. But in amongst this, there were, of course, many women that ran the pub as well, that took over from their husbands. And one of the key women was a woman called Mrs. Sarah Ann Haylock Vars. And I just wanted to mention from her obituary, so she died in 1913. She was 76 years old. And she was associated with the Spotted Dog for more than half a century. And so she was residing there with her husband and then basically took over after he died. So the whole of her married life and her widowhood has been spent at that historic old hotel. So she really was kind of part of that. And I think, as well as shopkeepers, you know, those women that were brave enough to be landladies in amongst all of the industry workers around the docks were pillars of the community, as pub landlords are today. So from the little mural that we can see, we're just spinning around on ourselves to 47 Exning Road. And again, the house no longer exists. The streets may have been renumbered, but if you were to walk along Exning Road, you would have come across Annie Elizabeth Pugh, and she ran an oil shop, so a kind of general store selling oil to anyone who might need it, industry and also other households as well. And she was born in 1868. Again, it's so tantalizing to get these clues of women, but I'm sorry I don't have any images to show you of Annie Elizabeth, sorry. But good to know that, you know, we think about women running businesses a lot later than in the 19th century, but of course, women in the East End did not have that luxury. They were part of huge families, had huge amounts of children themselves, and needed to work alongside the men as well. So continuing from Exning Street, we're going to head and take a right down Beaconsfield Street to get to another little stop of a shop. So we're continuing along the side here. You can see very much the character of the post-World War II building in the area, and we're going to turn back onto Hermit Road. And we've just got our penultimate stop up ahead at number 147 Hermit Road. Now, you can probably sense the theme here that not the original shop that was on the site on the side here, but at number 147 you now find a Chinese restaurant actually. But if you were to come back here in sort of the turn of the 1900s, you would have found Mary Maria Clarke, and she ran a corner shop that was based here. And again, I wish I had some images to show you, but imagine an old-fashioned corner shop. Imagine going through the door and meeting, let's say she's smiling, Mary Maria Clarke. And again, just like the landlady that we heard about, Sarah Haylock, Vars, these would have been pillars of the community, places that women would have gone into daily and would have had these interactions with other business women who were running these much needed facilities for the community. But let me show you something that you can visit and go to today. So if we continue up Hermit Road, you get to this quite large green space, the Hermit Road Recreation Park. And if you cross over to the side, you can find a slight corner within the park. And you would get to the Daisy Parsons Memorial Garden. So just like the street names that we saw at the beginning of the tour, Daisy Parsons was the first female mayor of West Ham, and she has also a link with the Canning Town branch of the Women's Social Political Union. So Daisy Parsons, if you go into the Memorial Garden today, it's quite a lovely little space actually that you can find up ahead. But let me show you an image of Daisy. Apologies, I don't have any better quality image to show you, but Daisy was born in 1890 in Poplar, so again an East End girl born here, and the picture that I'm showing you is actually a kind of zoomed in version of a picture that I'll show you a little later in the next slide. But like a lot of the other East London-based suffragettes, she was working class as well. So she did have to work for a living. She couldn't rely on family money. And she worked at the Carrera's cigarette factory. Now, she actually worked in the factory that was based in Aldgate in the early 1900s. But you may know, if you're familiar with London, the famous Art Deco Egyptian building from the late 1920s of the same brand name, Carrera's The Black Cat cigarette factory. And again, this was a huge employer of women in the 1920s. It was built in 1928. But Daisy Parsons in particular not only is key for the Canning Town area because she later became mayor, but also she's key to the suffragette movement. This is an image of an event that was known as the Deputation, a collection of women who in 1914, of East End working class women, who went to 10 Downing Street to have their voices heard. And this was organised by Daisy Parsons and also another leading suffragette, a woman called Julius Skur. And you can see the women here had all come, they'd been chosen at several large meetings, some of them at Canning Town, at Bow and at Poplar, to basically gather a range of opinions, a range of problems, a range of grievances of East End working class women and find out why the vote was so important for them. And I think it's a part of the kind of suffragette story that often gets a bit overlooked. And really it's very powerful because so often the voices of these East End working class women have been lost to history, but not so now. So Daisy Parsons, she goes to this deputation just circled here, and she had written a speech with Sylvia Pankhurst helping her in order to get across, who she was and why this plight is important to her. So she says that she left school at the age of 12 because she had a rather delicate father and mother, and she mentions working at the cigarette factory as well. And she says she used to pack 1,000 cigarettes for 3p, and in the morning, when we were quite fresh, we could pack 2,000. And as we got tired after dinner, we can only pack 1,500. And she's explaining the plight that these women in factories were driven really like slaves, like machines, and were often paid, were always paid less than men. And they had nobody to represent them in Parliament, to stand up for them and to campaign for their vote. And this is why it was so necessary for them. On the other side, you have Julius Skur as well, who I just mentioned. And again, she was chosen, she was born in Limehouse in 1871, and she was chosen as part of this deputation to go and tell her plight to Parliament and kind of communicate her stories. And she says, we women of East London are much concerned in regard to social conditions of our district. There is very great poverty around us and the rents are terribly high. There is much unemployment amongst the men, and a very large proportion of women are the principal breadwinners, although they are both the child bearers and the keepers of the home. We want to say to you that in our view, a woman attending to her home is as much a wage earner as if she went out into a factory, and that because women bring children into the world, they perform the greatest of all services to the state, and they have the greatest of all reasons to desire to help in securing its welfare. And I just think those words that were written in 1914 could have been written in a modern article today. Nothing has really changed, and these women so powerfully, so eloquently came to Downing Street to have their voices heard, basically. So I just wanted to leave you with a more modern image of Daisy Parsons in her mayoral robes in the 1930s as a place that is named after her and that you could go and visit today. Here she is actually opening the Beckton Lido, but as the first female mayor of West Ham as well. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of whistle-stop tour around some of the women of Newham, and particularly of Canning Town. As I mentioned, it's really hard to piece together, and thank you to the East End Women's Museum, who have dug out these stories of women who otherwise might be lost to history, who manage shops and other things in the area. But I hope you feel inspired by some of these stories, and I would love to answer any of the questions. Yes, Jan quite rightly said the Spotted Dog pub is thought to have been a hunting lodge for King Henry VIII. He seems to have had so many hunting lodges around London, he must have been busy all the time.
So we have created these trails. So this is the kind of physical version. So you can download these. I'm going to put the link in the chat, or you can pick up a physical copy from Canning Town Library. And if you enjoyed this event, then Katie is leading another virtual tour in Silvertown on Sunday evening. And we're also running an online illustration workshop tomorrow morning. So you can find out how you can draw these illustrations. I hope you can see those. And both are free to join, and I'll pop the links in the chat box. And just a little bit about the East End Women's Museum, in case you've not heard of us. So we seek to record, research, share and celebrate the stories of East London women, past and present, and it's the only dedicated women's museum in England, and we're soon to have a permanent home in Barking. So we're designing the new museum space, and we're going to hold a number of consultation events in the next few months, and we're going to open in 2022. So sign up to the museum newsletter, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and hear more about the opening and how you can get involved in the consultations. So I'll pop all those links in the chat box, and if you've got any questions or comments for Katie, I'll hand back over. Katie, are there any questions for you in that chat?
I'm not sure. Somebody did actually mention, I saw previously, about the name of Canning Town. and I had heard that it was sort of related to a kind of empirical connection of Charles Canning, but I don't know if that's seconded by I was too focused on the women. Clearly should have looked at what Canning Town was named after.
The women are the main thing. Let me just have a quick scroll. Oh, lots of people coming on Sunday, brilliant.
Someone saying, thank you very much for my first virtual tour, really enjoyed that. It's a really lovely way of kind of walking around, isn't it, and seeing what's there now, and you really feel like you're there. It's actually my first virtual tour, so thank you for that, Katie.
Oh, you're very welcome. Well, yeah, I mean, it makes it easier when you've got some of the historic images as well, but as I said, you know, it works really well here because, you know, so many of these buildings you can't see the evidence of the women that are there today. So it's quite nice to be able to sit in the comfort of home and be whizzed around Canning Town.
Someone has just asked, Philippa has said, was Minnie Bulldog ever imprisoned in Holloway?
I believe so, yes, because many of the suffragettes were, of course. I think Annie Kenny was imprisoned about 13 times. So I don't remember off the top of my head if Minnie was, but I think that she was. I don't know how many times.
Yes, I've got it. This has come from one of our volunteer researchers from the museum. So the 23rd of October 1906, Minnie was arrested, sentenced to 2 months in Holloway. And when she was released on the 24th of November, 40 of the Canning Town WSPU women signed a petition to show their appreciation of, quote, the loyal, brave and noble manner in which she bore imprisonment, faced slander and criticism. But it didn't stop her, she kept going.
I remember as well, I think it's some of your research, Rosanna, that, you know, a lot of the women, when they were arrested, you know, they were given the choice, either give up campaigning, you know, for 6 weeks or months, or we're going to put you in prison. And nearly always they chose, no, we're going to go to prison. And I think in the most recent kind of suffragette film, they showed the disparity of middle class and working class women, you know, because middle class women could afford bail and could escape the kind of more of the horrors of jail, whereas a lot of the EastEnders were kind of left to their fate.
Definitely, and you know, needing employment as well. So Adelaide, who is married to Donald that we saw, Donald fully supported her whilst in prison and looked after all their children, and he was a dock worker as well, so that would have been a full-on job. So yeah, absolutely amazing. So there's plenty more records as well on the Newham Heritage Month. If you just search for East End Women's Museum on there, that's some of our volunteers' research as well. So Katie's done a sterling job in putting it all together.
Just more praise for you, Katie, and all your virtual tours. We've got a lot of your followers here. Rowena says another thumbs up for Katie's virtual tours. I've watched all 5 series.
Oh, thank you. I promise I didn't pay them to say this.
Well, if there are no other questions.
If there's no more questions, I just want to say thank you for such an interesting and kind of amazingly put together tour, Katie. It's been a real pleasure listening to you, and yes, I'm going to sign up for more virtual tours. And thank you, Rosanna from the East End Women's Museum. As she was saying, please do look on the Newham Heritage website. There's lots more information about wonderful women of Newham, and again, 2 more upcoming events with the illustration workshop tomorrow and the other virtual tour on Silvertown on Sunday. So thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you from the far corners from Zimbabwe to Canning Town, from where else did we have people? From Holland to
Germany, Romford, amazing.
Fantastic. Wow. Just lovely to connect up with people. Thank you very much.